On a hot summer day, in their garage, Steve Jobs and his dad were looking at a cabinet that his dad made. Steve asked why his dad is going the extra mile to make the interior and the back piece of wood on the cabinet be high quality and look good. And Steve's dad says that great products are great from inside out, and only a poor craftsman would make something poor on the interior but look great on the exterior. This is my second time reading the entirety of Steve Jobs' biography by Walter Isaacson. And the first time that I came across this book was actually in September 2011. I was 13 for my first time in the United States, in a school in the United States, mind you, September of 2011, where I come into the chemistry class, and for the first time I see this Middle Eastern looking guy saying that he's the Newton of this era and he has passed away. And at the time I didn't realize this, but um, Steve had impacted me a lot up to that point, and he was going to impact me a lot afterwards, after that as well. And what happened is that the first book I ever picked up to read, non related to school, mind you, was the Steve Jobs biography. Because at the time my English was not good enough, I read a few chapters and I just let it pass and I didn't read it further until I believe last year that I finished this book for the first time. And in my second reading, there are things that came to my attention that I like to say in this podcast episode. And let's get into it. Basically, in this episode, I'm going to talk about Steve's relationship with his dad. Um, Steve, believed that he was special, and maybe that sometimes came out in an arrogant way. But one aspect of Steve believing that was that he believed that he creates great products. He will not stand up for even 1 second for the lack of a better word, shitty products. And his respect for great products, and he might call it great products, I might call it great craftsmanship, comes from his relationship with his dad, but also from a unique time in San Francisco history in the 1960s, and how that era is special in shaping the company that will later become Apple. Is that at the time, HP and Fairchild Semiconductor, Fairchild, some of the people from Fairchild later start Intel computers, is that there's a lot of hardware engineering being done in the Bay and Silicon Valley area, and many of the dads in the neighborhood were hardware people that crafted their own engines, tinkered with their own electronics, and had a lot of parts laying around. And in this culture of physically engineering something, there was a lot of great craftsmen people as well, people that created the things with their hands and tools and made it look beautiful. And in this, neighborhood, you might imagine full of engineers, a lot of the kids picked up on their dad's, work as well and tinkered with things with their bare hands, things that later on in the next generation or two, um, kids did not have access to because their parents did not work in that. At most, their parents worked with software, so the kids, worked on software as well. Um, and that's a very interesting thing because Apple's success is just as much about software as is hardware, if not hardware being the more of the magic that started the fire of the $3 trillion company at the moment. So that's a very interesting thing that I picked up at the moment. And the fact that in the 1980s we had the push of manufacturing leaving the States, that culture of craftsmanship left the country as well and left the next generation of founders as well. One thing that you want to take a look at is If you want to take a look at decades, 1950s we had Steve Jobs and Bill Gates, right? 19 and if we go 20 years later, let's say 30 years later, in the 1980s, um, I believe. Let me actually look because I'm not 100% sure. I believe founders of Google, Sergey and Larry, they're both 1970 kids. Yes, Sergey is 1970 kids. Larry Page is 1970s as well. Yes, 1970s. And as I would think, well, Mark Zuckerberg is 1970s as well. But I want to give you another interesting point on that. Elon Musk is 1970s kid as well. But the difference between Elon and Larry and Sergey is that Elon grew up in South Africa, and there he had access to some hardware engineering and hardware tinkering as well. But Larry and Sergey, they're very, um, you can call it software people, um, and that's the thing that changed, and especially in 1980s and 90s. Um, and if you want to take a look at the 100 people on the Forbes list now, um, the number of people in the top 100 that are based in software is much more than hardware. And that's a very interesting thing. And I wonder um, if manufacturing didn't move from the States, if that would be the case as well. Because the great thing about hardware is that it's physical and there's a tangible value associated with it that you can really sell it for a premium. Okay, so those were the 2 points that I wanted to, hit on first. One is Steve's relationship with his dad and how that started a fire of craftsmanship with them as well. And two, the hardware engineering culture in San Francisco. Another thing about Steve's relationship with his dad is even though Steve was an adopted kid, well, his parents, for you can call it adoptive parents, they were very kind. And I would say an outlier from the era that they were from. We're talking about 1950s. That's 70 years ago. Adopting kids was extremely rare. And the way that they treated Steve, and the way you can see it in biography as well, um, sometimes adoptive relationships don't go as pure or as caring as they would ideally should be. And Steve's parents were not that. They were caring and they loved Steve and they made him feel special as well, which kudos to them. But the interesting thing is, Steve and his dad, from a personality perspective, were actually very similar as well. They both like negotiating. They both cared about the quality of products, so they hit it off pretty well. Um, and when you read the biography, you can see that probably out of Bob Dylan, Steve's dad is the person that he looked up to the most. Um, and he found him to be a very cool person, which, again, if you think of Steve, that's not something that happens a lot. All right, the next point I want to get into is running two companies. For me personally, last year I was, I don't know, banging on my head trying to figure out how I'm gonna work on two companies at the same time, and I thought I was kind of lonely or kind of stupid about thinking of being able to run and start two companies at the same time. And what I realized is that as much as I thought I was crazy, it's not that rare. A lot of times when you care about creating something in the world, you're not going to be a person that only creates about creating one thing either. You will have multiple things that you will care about. For Elon, that turned out to be Tesla and SpaceX. For Steve, it became Pixar and Apple. Or you might call it Next and Pixar, whatever you want to call it. And what happened is that in the 1990s, Pixar created the Toy Story, and that was the first computer animated film, and it did really well. And at the same time, in 1997, Apple buys Next and brings on Steve, and Steve is essentially the CEO of the company. And he's running two companies at the same time. And there's a part of him that you can see in the interviews that is being done at that time that thinks, is it really possible to run two companies at the same time? Am I in my right mind to be doing this? But you know what? I give a shit about both companies, so I'm gonna do it. And that's what Steve did. But it's a thing that is great and super awesome about reading biographies is that you think the problems that only you are dealing with, you're not alone. And even people in the past that turn out to be super successful dealt with the same things as well. And Steve did both, and he did both successfully, and I mean epically successfully. If you think about the success that both Pixar and Apple had. Um, so that's one other thing that came to my attention as well. The last thing I want to talk about um, with regards to Steve's second read of his biography is that Steve was special, even when you read the biography of so many people that turn out to be extremely financially successful. Steve was special in that he was a sensitive person, but he was a hard person. He was a tough person. And in that sense, you can say he's kind of similar to Michael Jordan as well, where the tiniest thing could, piss him off so tremendously that he might move a mountain about it. But he was a sensitive person, but he was super artistic as well. And a lot of times when you think of artists, sometimes you might think of softies as well. But Steve was able to incorporate both the soft side and the hard side, um, similar to how Apple incorporated the software and the hardware seamlessly with each other. And what I realized is that a lot of people that Steve had is in his design studios, he cared about people that were artistic. So essentially, he hired a lot of people that were softies, but he cared that those softies expressed their opinion, pushed back when they felt strongly about something. And I felt like that is missing in this world. This world has some amount of great products and a good amount of shitty products, a good amount of mediocre products, a good amount of products that, frankly, for the amount of money that is being spent on them, are designed poorly and they're ugly. And I feel like there's a lot of artistic and acutely aware of design people in this world that, because they're softies, because those two tendencies go with each other, are not bold enough to express their opinion and bold enough to take power and take charge in teams, companies, to make a change. And I feel like more of that should happen in this world because what Steve did, to me, one part of Steve's legacy is that he changed life and how life looks um, around us tremendously in a very amazing way. As a person who has a sensitivity to be aware of design things, the world before Apple and Steve was super ugly and convoluted. And this is what I mean by that. Look before 2012, 2007. How did phones look like? And how do phones look like today? Compare them on average. Give a beauty score 1 to 10 and compare the jump, okay? And also compare laptops prior to 2000 and after 2000, or maybe prior to 2010 and after 2010. I remember vividly laptops being most of the times, even expensive laptops, being built out of plastic and dark plastic and super ugly colors as well. And when Apple built laptops out of aluminum casing, people started to copy them, and now almost everybody does the aluminum casing laptop for their flagship laptops. And that's a thing that Steve brought into this world and his team brought into this world. They made beautiful products for everyday people. And personally, as someone who is sensitive to the design things, when you see shitty design, it pisses off people that are sensitive to design much more than it pisses off um, average people that are, let's say, average acuity to design. And it makes people like us that care about design, and there's a lot of people out there that care about design. It makes us feel happy and at peace with the things that are around us. And I feel like because Steve was highly aware of design, and because he was at the top of power at Apple, he could push back on millions of times where engineers would have wanted something that is less elegant but more practical, or more easier to build or more easier to push to be built. But Steve said, no, we got to create a great product. So that is one lesson that maybe we should do, so that even in a world without Steve, we can keep on creating great products, um, and have more beauty around us and have less headaches as sensitive people, or maybe as people that genuinely care about design, or average people as well. Because I feel like when you create something that is beautiful, both externally and internally, it creates less headaches for everyone, and it makes everybody around the world happy. So that was my reflections on reading Steve Jobs for the second time fully. Um, this time I came across people that I really want to interview later on as well, to ask more interesting questions. And I will do probably another one of these, or maybe many more of these, where I go over the biography that I read and highlight new things that comes to my mind. Um, a few people that I want to really interview after this. I want to interview the two people at Pixar, um, and basically co-founder of Pixar with Steve. I believe it's Ed Catmull, and John Lasseter. Let me double check that, because they were people that, they dealt with Steve for about 10 or 15 years, maybe 20 years, but they got less of the angry Steve. And it's interesting why they got that, but anyways, very interesting. So yeah, Ed Catmull and John Lasseter. Um, I would love to interview Johnny Ive as well, because he has very interesting perspectives as well, and also Tim Cook. But those are for another time. With that, that was the first episode of the Endless Curiosity podcast, and I'll see you guys on the next one. Until then, all the best.